Who's knocking from the grave? They say every town has a secret, but Gray Ridge, Ohio had one that woke people from sleep. People here learned not to answer late-night knocks, not because of burglars or pranks, but because an old injustice had found a way to keep moving in the dark. Daniel Whitaker, a repairman who could fix anything except what kept him awake, sat at the kitchen table studying overdue bills and a tiny crack snaking across his favorite coffee mug. His wife, Mara, slept upstairs with their kids, Caleb and June. A wind nudged the maple trees, and the house settled like an old dog curling tighter on a cold night. At exactly 3:00 a.m., 3 hollow knocks rolled through the house, as if the front door itself had coughed. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel flinched so hard the mug clinked against his tooth. The digital clock glowed 3 Saruzo in a stubborn neon red. He'd heard stories from the shop about the woman whose name people only sometimes dared to say. About what her husband did. About the field behind the fairgrounds, where men dug before dawn and swore no one saw them. Secrets were the real floodplain in Gray Ridge. Water wasn't what got under doors here. From the back fields, a low, terrible bellow shivered the night, like a bull's roar, tearing the fog at its seams. In the pause, after Daniel swore, he heard something more metal on soil. A blunt thunk, like a hoe striking earth and sticking. He stood gently as if his chair might accuse him. He told himself it was a neighbor, an accident, a stranded motorist. Yet the stories lined up behind his ribs like people waiting at the DMV, each holding a number for the same service fee. Knock, knock, knock. Upstairs, a floorboard murmured. He pictured Mara's palm under her cheek hair in a tired halo. June's stuffed rabbit half under her chin, Caleb's ankles sticking from the blanket like he'd outrun his own covers. The house had 100 tiny sounds at night. The refrigerator's soft breath, the heater ticking as it cooled rain gutters swishing when wind pushed them. Tonight, each sound felt Mike turned up and aimed at his spine. He peeked through the peephole. Only their flagstone stoop and the always too bright porch light, casting a cone onto nothing. The cul-de-sac beyond looked like an empty stage after the actors had left only the set remaining. Hello? He called, his voice soft enough to pass for thinking. Something tapped the brass door knocker again, 3 times precise, spaced, as if measured with a ruler. In Gray Ridge lore, Ruth Halverson had been beautiful in the way sorrow is beautiful when it's lit just right. People said she kept a jar for lightning bugs and would let them go when the jar was warm in her hand. They said her husband Dale liked to control the way some men like whiskey too much and too often. One night sirens didn't come. Arguments can be quiet when they happen under quilts. The next morning, every dog in a mile started howling at nothing. They never found her. That should have been the end. But stories don't like endings. They keep looking for doors. From the far end of the street, a faint rhythmic crunch rose and fell, like tools biting into wet soil, followed by the drag of something heavy through grass. Daniel undid the chain. The habit was older than the tales. He was the sort of man who fixed porch steps on Saturdays for neighbors who forgot to ask. He opened the door a crack so thin a pencil wouldn't fit through, and a cold, almost polite breeze stepped into the living room, as if invited. No one on the stoop. Just the doormat with welcome faded into welcome me. Like the word itself had lost a letter to fear. He leaned out, cupping his hand over his eyes to see past the porch light. In the field beyond the cul-de-sac, cows bawled once long, panicked and human-sounding. Closer now, there came the brittle stutter of something tapping clappered a fingernail behind the wall, then the slow, sticky peel of a wet leaf lifting from a window. He almost laughed, almost because that's what sane men do when stories try to unzip them. "Okay," he whispered, "this is dumb." Behind him, the hallway thermostat clicked. From the kitchen sink, the faucet was coughing over the pipes with a rubbery seal. The house took a breath. Daniel widened the door an inch, and then he saw it a wet handprint on the outside of the door jamb at shoulder height, already drying at the edges, as if whoever left it had been standing there a while considering their options. The print wasn't bloody, no need for gore to make nausea, but the shape suggested someone pressing hard from outside, as if to feel the house's pulse before deciding where to cut. Somewhere in the dark, gravel crunched 3 steps, pause, 3 steps, pause, mimicking the pattern of the knock. Dan Mara's voice floated down, spoon with sleep. "You okay?" "Yeah," he called. "Probably kids." The lie was sour, and his mouth understood first. He stepped onto the stoop. The air felt not cold, but empty, like a room after a party. He had the dumb thought that he'd left the garage door open again. He half-turned to check. That's when the knock sounded directly behind his ear, 3 gentle taps against nothing. Tap, tap, tap. The cow bawled again, abrupt and strange, as if something had yanked the sound back out of its mouth. And under it all, barely there, the steady workman-like thunk of a tool meeting earth thunk, drag, thunk, drag. He pivoted too quickly, and the door swung wider on its hinges. The porch light flickered. He felt he didn't see, not yet, a weightlessness at his collar, like fingers testing the fabric where it met his throat. Dan Mara, again sharper now. "Come back inside." "I'm here," he said. But it came out like someone else had borrowed his voice. He thought of Dale Halverson, his Greensboro cap, the way he'd spit to the side when making a point. The town's men had carried his casket when a stroke had finally made him harmless. The church ladies baked casseroles and tucked foil under the lids. Nobody talked about the patch of earth behind the fairgrounds that had settled in, slightly like a body in a hammock. The porch light hummed in restraint, and then the filament sizzled with dry mosquito burn. From beneath the porch, something scraped a small exploratory sound, like a child's fingernail testing paint. Further out, the night shook with a grunt that was almost language. Then the weird, breathy laugh a gate makes when wind forces it to open. Daniel's feet shifted without permission. He became aware of how close the rail was to the steps, and how the steps led to the flagstones, and how the flagstones led to the sharp lip of the yard. Everything in the world, he realized, was just one thing leading to another. A shape gathered at the bottom of the steps, not identical to a person, but inspired by one. Imagine steam cast in a shadow. Imagine grief learning to walk. It wore the idea of a dress and the memory of a ribbon at the throat. It didn't glow. It absorbed light the way late ponds do. "Miss Halverson," he said, because he was a man who still believed calling a name might return a borrowed object. "I'm sorry for..." He didn't get to finish the apology for someone else's crime. The air snapped like a sheet being yanked straight, and the door slammed against the wall that hinges. There came a soft cracked wood bone, and then the sound of a body moving without the kindness of muscles. Somewhere out in the fields, a hoe bit the dirt again with a thump. And no temperature, only insistence took Daniel by the collar and the shoulder. He was strong enough to lift a window unit by himself, and yet strength is a contract the supernatural doesn't sign. The night had 1,000 thin fingers. It only needed 2. Dan Mara shouted, now running. The kids stirred. From upstairs, June cried out a small, startled sound like a spoon dropped on tile. The world rotated a quarter turn without asking him, and Daniel was stepping where there were no steps. He glimpsed his front door wider than it had ever been. He saw the living room lamp sway as if something had brushed it in passing. He didn't feel cold. He didn't feel anything because feeling implies a choice. 3 knocks struck the front door again, thicker now, as if answered from both sides. Knock, knock, knock. YouTube doesn't allow us to linger on brutality, and Grey Ridge didn't need gore to communicate cruelty. The shape leaned near his ear, and Daniel sensed breath without dampness, anger without volume. A kind of quiet, so concentrated it was heavier than sound. His last idea was simple. He should have fixed the porch light last week. There was a final muffled snap, the sort of sound you hear when someone twists a stubborn jar lid, and at last it gives. Beyond the cul-de-sac, a cow lowed once and then fell silent, and the night's tool kept working thunk, drag, thunk, drag. When Mara reached the doorway, Daniel was gone from the stoop. His slipper lay sideways against the second step, still warm in its hollow where the heel had been. The porch light blinked as if deciding whether to stay in this world or not. She tasted metal the way panic writes its name on the tongue. Kids, she said, fighting her voice back into service. Downstairs. Now. Above her, the house let out a tight wooden groan, the sort it makes before heavy snow, only there was no snow. The front door shivered once in its frame, and then the silence pressed so hard that even the refrigerator's low hum seemed to hide. And from the other side of the door, from the town, from the fields behind, where men built things by day and buried them by night, the sound kept coming as patient as a metronome. Knock, knock, knock. Mara Whittaker had never thought of her kitchen sink as dangerous. It was where she rinsed lettuce-bathed June's baby dolls and soaked the lasagna pan after church potlucks. But in the dark hour after Daniel vanished, the sink became a throat. She dragged Caleb and June down the stairs, her robe tangled around her knees. The kid's eyes were heavy but wide, confused by the sharpness in her voice. Caleb clutched his baseball bat, the one with tape spiraling the handle like a candy cane. June carried the stuffed rabbit by one ear, its stitched smile mocking the moment. The front door stood ajar, its brass chain swinging like a metronome. Mara slammed it shut. "Don't open it," she hissed, as if the kids had even thought to try. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the effort of making it strong. From outside, the knocking began again, slower now, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. June whimpered. "Is Daddy playing a joke?" No, Mara snapped sharper than intended. She knelt and cupped June's cheeks. "It's not Daddy. Do you hear me? You stay with me." Then came the sound of hooves pounding the earth beyond the cul-de-sac, a frenzied stampede. The bawling of cattle broke into jagged cries, high and low, like broken instruments played by children. Mara rushed the children into the kitchen, locking the back door and pressing her weight against it, as if her body could substitute for deadbolts. Caleb stood like a soldier, though his knees shook. The pipes inside the walls moaned, water gurgling as though the house itself were clearing its throat. The faucet began to drip, plink, plink, echoing in the metal basin like a clock gone mad. Mara froze. She hadn't touched the handle. The water was off, Mom Caleb asked. She forced a smile. "It's just air in the pipes." The faucet coughed again, belching a thin stream that sprayed sideways, spitting like a snake. It hissed, sputtered, then flowed freely clear at first, then clouding brown, then darkening into something thick that reeked like iron and old pennies. June screamed, backing away. Mara reached for the knob, but the faucet resisted. The water surged harder, as if someone unseen forced the handle open further, laughing without sound. The sink filled rapidly, bubbles burping out as if someone's lungs were beneath the surface. She grabbed a dish towel to stuff into the drain, but the towel was sucked in, immediately vanishing like a tongue swallowed by a throat. The children clung to each other. "Turn it off," Mom Caleb shouted. "I'm trying." She twisted the handle until her wrist popped, but the water only grew angrier, splashing in bursts that soaked her nightgown. Then came a new sound, hands slapping the underside of the stainless steel sink, dull thuds reverberating through the basin. Slap, slap, slap. Mara stumbled back, her breath ragged. She wanted to run, but the children were behind her. She had to stand grounded to the wall. "Listen to me," she told them, voice breaking. "Go to the neighbors. Now." Neither moved. From within, the water, gurgling laughter, bubbled up hollow and wet. The faucet shook violently, rattling against the counter as if gripped from the other side. Before she could react, invisible hands erupted from the sink hands made of water, but heavy, deliberate fingers sharp as icicles. They seized Mara's wrists and yanked her forward with impossible strength. She screamed and braced herself, but her chest slammed against the counter. The water hands shoved her head toward the basin. Mom Caleb dropped the bat and lunged, but a force like a gust of wind hurled him across the room. He crashed into the refrigerator, wheezing. June shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing, blending with the roar of rushing water that now thundered like a river set loose. Mara's face plunged into the sink. The water was colder than ice, numbing her instantly. She kicked, clawed, tried to rise, but the hands pressed her down, relentless. Her lungs screamed for air. Inside the water, she heard a woman's voice, distant, distorted, like singing through a radio underwater. "You left me here. Now I'll leave you here." Her body convulsed bubbles spilling from her nose and mouth, breaking the surface like desperate prayers. The children's screams blurred into muffled echoes as blackness spread across her vision. Her last sight was the faucet twisting itself tighter, sealing her fate like a lid screwed shut. The sink gurgled one final time, glug, 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 as her body went still. The rushing water stopped instantly, leaving only the sound of dripping slow and steady like a clock counting down. Drip, drip, drip. The kitchen fell silent. Caleb crawled toward his mother's limp form, sobbing. June clutched the rabbit so hard its ear tore. Both children stared in horror at the sink, where the water had drained completely away, leaving not a drop behind. And then, from the front door, the knocking began anew, sharper, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. Each rap vibrated the walls, shaking dishes and cupboards. The children were alone now, and the house was listening. The Whitaker house had always been ordinary. Beige siding flower beds choked with mulch curtains bought on sale at the strip mall. But now, under the red digits of the clock that glowed 3:33 a.m., the house breathed differently. Every rafter, every nail seemed to lean toward the two children huddled in the living room. Caleb stood with the baseball bat pressed to his chest, his knuckles white. June sat on the couch, knees drawn up, her rabbit dangling limp. Their mother was upstairs in the kitchen sink, but they didn't dare think about that. The smell of iron still lingered, metallic and wet. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Each rap heavier, as though the door frame itself was cracking inward. June whimpered, pressing her palms against her ears. Caleb swallowed. "We don't answer. We don't open. he whispered, repeating the town's unwritten rule as if saying it might keep them safe. But then the knocking stopped, and silence, thick, waiting silence, draped over the house like a blanket. Caleb looked at June. Maybe it's gone. From above, the ceiling groaned a long creak, as if something heavy was crawling along the beams. Both children froze. Another sound followed, scratching nails dragging across plaster circling above their heads. Scritch. 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 June clutched the rabbit tight. "It's in the attic," she whispered. "No," Caleb said too quickly. But his eyes betrayed him. He glanced upward, watching the ceiling bulge slightly, dust sifting down like flour from a sieve. The sound grew louder, until it hovered directly above them. Caleb raised the bat like a sword. He wanted to protect his sister, but his arms trembled. His chest burned with the need to breathe quieter, to be invisible. Then came the thud, so sudden, so violent, that the light fixture rattled and June screamed. Thud upstairs, Caleb gasped, grabbing her hand. They ran toward the staircase, thinking the higher floor meant safety, though instinct screamed otherwise. Halfway up, June tripped on a rabbit's ear. Caleb yanked her up, but in that pause, the ceiling above the living room split with a groan, plaster rained down. From the darkness, something pale and thin dangled a hand. Wet, lifeless, it reached fingers twitching with jerks, like a puppet's strings. The children scrambled, but the house betrayed them. From the walls came a chorus of knocks, rapid fire, knock, 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 like fists pounding from every side. June sobbed. Caleb dragged her into his room at the end of the hall. He slammed the door and wedged the bat through the handles of his dresser to bar it shut. They backed against the bed. Silence. And then a soft tap on the ceiling above them. Tap, 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 like fingertips on glass. Caleb's throat tightened. "Don't look up," he whispered. But June couldn't help it. The plaster above her began to crack in spite of her. Tiny flakes fell onto her hair. The scratching grew frenzy of nails clawing from her. Scritch, 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 June screamed. The ceiling gave way. With a sickening rip, Caleb was yanked upward, lifted by nothing visible. His scream split the night, his bat clattering uselessly to the floor. "Caleb!" June shrieked, reaching for his leg. Her small fingers scraped against his sock, but he was pulled higher, his body smashing into the ceiling as if gravity had turned inside out. The sound of nails tearing skin echoed ragged and wet as Caleb's hands clawed at the ceiling in desperation. His fingertips ripped, smearing red streaks across the white plaster. June stood paralyzed as her brother's body was sucked into the ceiling, his cries fading. Then silence. Only the rabbit in her lap and the drip, drip, drip of blood falling from above onto the carpet. She was alone. And then from the front door, the knocks began again. Slow, heavy, knock, knock, knock. June Whitaker was 9 years old. Too young to know what a haunting truly was, too old to believe her rabbit could save her. She sat curled on the living room couch, eyes swollen from crying, her hands shaking as she pressed the toy's frayed ear against her lips. Her father was gone, her mother drowned in the kitchen sink, her brother dragged screaming into the ceiling. Now she was alone. The knocks returned slower, deeper, shaking the walls like hammer blows. Knock, knock, knock. June flinched. The sound seemed to crawl under her skin. She tried to cover her ears, but the noise pulsed inside her chest. "Please stop," she whispered. From outside, the sound of shovels biting into soil carried across the night. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag. Each strike echoed as if the earth itself protested. June's gaze darted toward the curtained window. She dared not peek, but she imagined a figure in the yard digging, always digging. Then came the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate steps, clip, clop, drawing closer. A bull's guttural roar bellowed in the distance, low and grotesque. June whimpered, pulling her knees closer. The air inside the living room changed. It grew heavy, pressing against her lungs. The lamp flickered. The rabbit slipped from her arms and fell to the rug. "Mommy," she whispered. A floorboard creaked, one long, splintering groan. June's eyes darted toward the hall. Empty. Yet she felt watched. From the kitchen came a faint, dripping drip. Drip, drip like water still mourning at the sink. Her breath caught. "I want Daddy." Then the front door swung open on its own. No wind. No reason. It simply yawned wide, the chain dangling loose, as though never fastened. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, pounding against invisible walls inside the house now. Knock, 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 June screamed, running to the middle of the room. The ceiling above cracked again, dust bleeding. A low scraping followed scrooge, as if nails etched words into the beams. June's little body trembled. "Please don't hurt me." The house didn't listen. A sudden slam, the window shutters clapped shut outside, echoing like gunshots. Bam, bam, bam. Oh, June stumbled, clutching her ears. She wanted to run upstairs, but the thought of Caleb's blood dripping froze her. She wanted to run outside, but something worse waited there. So she stood paralyzed in the living room. Then a whisper brushed her ear. Not air, not imagination. A voice wet and cold, one right. June shrieked and spun, but nothing stood behind her. The living room grew darker. Shadows pooled and spilled. From above, a loud crack as if wood snapped, then came a tearing sound of fabric. Her feet left the floor. She was yanked upside down, legs in the air, her nightgown falling over her face. She screamed, flailing, but invisible cords cinched her ankles together. Her body swung midair, suspended from nothing like a puppet hanging from a hook. Her screams filled the house, bouncing against the walls, mixing with the steady sound of digging outside. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag. Blood rushed to her head, her vision blurred. She felt something warm slide down her cheek, blood from her nose. It dripped, drip, drip, drip. Each drop pattered onto the living room carpet, dark circles spreading one by one. She cried, "Please, I don't want to die." But the unseen rope pulled tighter, jerking her higher until her head nearly grazed the ceiling. Her arms thrashed, reaching for anything, air, hope, God, but found only shadows. From the darkness came a final series of knocks, thunderous, shaking every window pane. Knock, 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 the house shuddered. June's voice cracked into silence. Her small body swung once, twice, then went limp. The dripping continued, steady and endless. Drip, drip, drip. And when all was quiet, the front door knocked once more. Knock, knock, knock. Though no one was left alive to answer. Grey Ridge did what small towns do after a storm. It pretended to sleep. But the Whitaker house had turned the night into a mouth, and the town could feel the teeth. The living room held its last tableau. June's small shoes splayed near the rug, the rabbit on its back, the ceiling cracked like an eggshell. The kitchen wore a hush that had the weight of water. The front stoop kept its habit of welcoming strangers. From somewhere beyond the place, a bull loosed a long guttural bellow that rolled over the fields and pressed flat against the siding. And beneath that animal, grief-patient and methodical as arithmetic, came the steady cadence of a hoe-biting soil thunk, drag, thunk, drag. If a passerby had stepped into the Whitaker yard and cupped a hand to the glass, they might have seen shadows pooling in corners where corners hadn't existed before. They might have felt a cold so clean it polished memories. They might have heard what the house itself was trying not to say. The front door shivered in its frame, and then with the politeness of an usher tapping a shoulder, knocked for itself 3 measured raps that traveled the ribs of the house like a mallet along xylophone bars. Knock, 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 across town in a manufactured home that still smelled faintly of cardboard. Mrs. Ellery stirred in her recliner. She dreamed of water hands dipping and lifting as if doing dishes in a river, and woke with a start, her throat dry. A far siren wound up somewhere on the highway, a thin metallic keening that rose, caught, and fell, as if it had forgotten what it was chasing. Ruth Halverson's story lived inside Gray Ridge like a splinter beneath skin. Her husband, Dale, had been a foreman at the plant, while factories were still promises you could touch. He liked things the way he liked them. That night, the house on Nob Hill held too much of him, and nowhere for her. No neighbor called the sheriff. Voices kept in kitchens are harder to prove in the daylight. The next morning, men with tired eyes and empty pockets went to help on a project behind the fairgrounds. They carried shovels that had names carved into the handles and didn't look at each other's faces. The cows in the adjacent pasture bawled until their throats ruptured, and one old mean-eyed, as stubborn as a welded bolt, kept bellowing like a father who has just realized what side of the door he is on. Time passed over her like water over stone. The town elevator kept lifting church casseroles. The Friday night games kept renewing the myth of boys who outrun what follows. But not every burial takes. Some return like letters marked undeliverable, readdressed to whoever answers. On the Whitaker porch, the brass knocker clicked in its bracket, impatient, and the 3 beats came again, wood against wood, the sound of an argument that is no longer interested in words. Knock, knock, knock. Inside absence arranged itself into furniture. Where Daniel had stood, the air held the echo of his doubt. Where Mara had knelt the floorboards, kept a memory like a bruise. Where Caleb's bat lay, the rubber tape spiraled like a road up a mountain and ended in nothing. The room had begun to smell like rain that never arrives. Up in the ductwork, a hollow moan drifted the low windpipe of the house singing to itself. From the kitchen, 3 small drips counted time onto the stainless surface drip. Drip, drip, each one slow enough to be heard separately, each one loud enough to be a verdict. Ruth wasn't a shape so much as an agreement between shadows. She wore the suggestion of a dress in the absence of footsteps. Where she moved, the air got serious. The ceiling over the living room gave a tired timber's deep groan, the kind a barn makes when snow decides to get personal. In the distance, a metal gate clanged, once then rattled on its hinge like a laugh without humor. If she had a face, it was the idea of one. If she had a voice, it had learned to come in on the breath between knocks. You kept me, that voice said to the fibers in the carpet, to the tins on the pantry shelf, to the toothbrushes in a cup by the sink. You kept me and called it love. The refrigerator's motor hummed away, purposeful for 3 seconds, then died as if told to mind its business. At the curb, a newspaper thumped the pavement, the sound apologetic, as if it knew that headlines were too small for nights like this. Ruth approached the threshold again, not because she needed to enter, but because rituals keep the world from slipping its laces. In life, she'd gone door to door for the school fundraiser with a little paper order form and a pen chewed at the cap. In death she went because she had been made small, and smallness is a kind of hunger. She lifted a hand that was mostly intention and tapped each knock a careful syllable. Knock, knock, knock. Somewhere behind the house, the steady hose song answered. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag like a metronome set to grief. If anyone had been left in the living room, they might have heard a different sound than something like a breath being let out after a very long hold. Relinquishment makes a sound if you listen hard enough. She turned, and memory raised itself like a weather vane. In her mind, she saw a dance at the VFW hall, a mason jar of lightning bugs casting a soft domestic galaxy. She saw Dale's jaw tight as wire. She saw hands that closed too easily on wrists, and a room that grew too small for her voice. If vengeance was a door, she had learned the measurements. On the street, tires hissed on wet blacktop, the kind of slick whisper that says the world will be washed clean, and then isn't. A dog 2 yards over gave 3 tentative barks, then one final yelp, and then no more. When Ruth turned back to the Whitaker door, she found it open. It was always open. That was the trick of this house, and of every house with a front stoop and a welcome mat where the door wants to be believed. The dead don't tally like the living do, but even a ghost can count to 4. Father, mother, son, daughter. The town had once told a different math. Forgive and forget equals peace. Ruth had learned the remainder. You didn't hurt me, she said to the rooms, to the family pictures, marching up the staircase, to the grades on the refrigerator, to the threadbare arm of the couch where her father had fallen asleep after the late sports highlights. You did nothing, and nothing is a kind of doing. The heater ticked expanding metal calling, and answering itself tick, tick, tick like a telegraph that has lost the message but kept the habit. Overhead, the attic coughed dust, a soft sift sound that fell, and then stopped as if embarrassed. Some stories ask for blood. Hers wanted attention. The knocks weren't the blows that took her. They were the questions afterward that nobody asked. She stepped back into the yard, and the night opened its hand. In the Halverson field, now leased to a dairy that pretended not to know there was a low place where nothing grew straight. The town called it a sink like a pipe problem, as if a plumber could fix the gravity of a sin. A cow bellowed once more, the sound catching its throat until the end came out like a rattle. The hoe cadence faltered, then resumed an endless homework problem you couldn't turn in. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag. Blue light teased the horizon. Morning thought about being brave. The world prepared the clatter of coffee pots and school buses and foremen's clipboards. But the night was not done with its arithmetic. A deputy turned down Maple Seed Drive, his cruiser rolling slow, his fingers worrying the edge of a styrofoam cup. He had been 6 when Ruth went missing, old enough to fetch his mother's Tupperware back from casserole nights, young enough to understand that grown-ups could lie without saying a word. He had the honest heart of a man who returns carts to the corral. His radio crackled the burst of timid child voices trying to make sense. From the Whitaker porch, carried on a breeze that smelled like creek water, and cold pennies came the familiar, devastating meter. Knock, knock, knock. He parked at the curb, not yet seeing the open door, not yet knowing the door was always like this. He stepped out into a silence that had opinions. Dispatch, he said, and cleared his throat because it wanted to close. Possible 1090 at Maple Seed address he didn't finish because the world doesn't like to hear itself declared out loud. The cruiser's engine clicked as it cooled metallic pins, measuring the air between breaths. From under the porch, something small skittered. Maybe a mouse, maybe the house trying on a heartbeat. and finding it didn't fit. In the field, a gate squealed, and then, as the wind died, squeaked once more for emphasis. He climbed the steps. He had knocked on 100 doors, noise complaints, teenage parties, once a runaway goat. He put out a knuckle. Habit said to announce himself. I wouldn't, a voice said, not aloud. But in the quiet, the way a hand presses on a shoulder in a crowd and guides without grabbing. He paused. He wasn't a superstitious man. He was practical to a fault. But he had also learned to respect the unspectacular ways grief pays his debts. He lowered his hand. Sheriff's office, he called. Anyone inside the living room gave back his words as a flat echo, the paper version of a voice sliding along empty walls. Somewhere up the street, a train horn threw its long, mournful note into the dark, and it came back thinner, like it had been eaten a little. He stepped inside. The air changed its mind and stood still. He saw the rabbit, and something in him accused the world of laziness. He saw the bat, and he thought of Little League of dads in sunglasses telling sons to keep their eye on it. He saw the thin spine of a school book under the coffee table and felt absurdly like knocking on the table and asking whether anyone was still working on their homework. Dispatch, I need, he started, then stopped. His attention had been taken by the front door. Why? Because it had closed itself behind him. That happens. Houses breathe. He told himself this and did not convince himself. Behind him, the door rapped once, twice, 3 times, gentle, precise, like a teacher's chalk, tapping a lesson into existence. Knock, knock, knock. He turned so fast he had to plant his feet, and the coffee went warm down his wrist. The door did not open. The room did not change. Ruth, he said without deciding to say it. The name was a key cut too long ago to fit any living lock, but sometimes locks remember. If Ruth was there, she was not sound, and she was not light. She was the gap where a question should have been. I'm sorry, he said, and wondered who he meant it for. I'm the house, exhaled, and audible softly, as if a paper bag had been filled, and then squeezed flat. From the kitchen, a single drop fell distinct, the syllable of a metronome that had been waiting for a conductor. Drip. Out in the fields, hoofbeats thudded, not many, just 2 or 3, a deliberate punctuation. Thud, thud. He backed out, not from fear, though there was some of that, but from respect. The best thing to do at certain thresholds is to leave them to their work. On the porch, he pulled the radio up. Dispatch, he said. Send everyone. And send the pastor, too. He didn't add. And the women who know how to make the kind of food that makes a kitchen look like it will hold. The cruiser's siren coughed to life, then opened its throat, the 2-tone wail slanting down the sleepy street. Within the house, answering neither siren nor authority, the knocker gave its 3 notes. Knock, knock, knock. By dawn, there would be tape and clipboards, and a quiet team in paper shoes. There would be neighbors standing on lawns, wearing coats over pajamas' arms, folded tight as if their ribs were fences. There would be words like tragic and unthinkable offered like paper plates in a rainstorm. There would also be Gray Ridge's old rules edited without acknowledgement. If you hear knocking at 3 a.m., you don't open. You don't ask who. You don't call out a name. You do not tell yourself that bad things are only for other streets. You sit very still, and you wait for the morning like a lifeguard waits for the cold water to decide what to do. Ruth would walk on. She had a list the town had written for her. She had a rhythm. Over the rail fence, a final cattle bell sounded the note of an animal that has learned to mimic the sadness around it. The hoe song persisted irregular now, a tired arm keeping time because it must. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag. And the Whitaker door, the one that had met Daniel's patience. Mara's assurances, Caleb's bravery, and June's hope, and found them all equal to silence, kept doing the one thing it had been taught. It knocked once for the living, twice for the dead, 3 times for the ones who did nothing. Knock, knock, knock. It knocked, although no one remained to answer. Knock, knock, knock. It kept knocking as dawn gathered itself, and the town decided whether to admit what it heard. Knock, knock, knock. Grey Ridge would tell itself what towns tell themselves, that this was a single strange night with its own ending. But endings have habits. Doors too. And so the door knocked, and the field answered, and the cattle cried, and the day broke with the sound of sirens trying to be louder than regret. Knock,